I'm Murli Chandrasekharan, professor in the business school here at UBC and the vice provost international at the University of British Columbia. I am delighted and honored to be situated today in the unceded, ancestral and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh people. And it's my pleasure to say a few words of welcome to all of you to this event, where we get to hear more about a day in the life of Canada's Foreign Minister, Honourable Minister Champagne. We are delighted that UBC is the first of many destinations for the Minister as he tours Canadian universities to talk about Canada's diplomatic response to the COVID-19 crisis. Canada's response to COVID-19 has been amazing. Quick, decisive action on the basis of science, compassion, humanity, and empathy has helped immensely. I, for one, am glad I'm here in Canada and here in BC. My family and I feel safe because we know that good decisions are being made by thoughtful, compassionate people. Good decisions and support from the federal government indeed helped UBC secure the safety of hundreds of its students who were in many, many countries pursuing their global education when the crisis engulfed the world. And today we continue to support our domestic and international students in ways that other countries have found challenging. So thank you, Mr. Champagne, for the service and leadership that you and your colleagues have shown in these difficult times. And as we contemplate emerging from a long shadow of this unprecedented crisis, voices are emerging that urge for greater multilateralism from which global solutions may surface. And central to the multilateral agenda is the need for greater understanding of global issues, as well as greater global design, inclusive planning, and coordination of solutions. And in the midst of such a challenging time when we're making choices every day to connect with family, friends, and community, I want to share some good news to get started. We are buoyed and humbled by the recent recognition of UBC's work in addressing challenges embodied by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This week, we learned that in the Times Higher Education University Impact Rankings, UBC placed first in Canada and 7th globally out of more than 850 participating institutions from 89 countries across 6 continents. These rankings, inaugurated in 2019, measure universities' overall impact through their work in meeting the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And in addition to its overall ranking, I'm thrilled that UBC placed first in 2 separate goals: for conserving life underwater by protecting marine habitats, and for taking action to mitigate climate change. UBC also placed third for promoting life on land through sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, management of forests, halting biodiversity loss, and 8th as well in the world for work in sustainable cities and communities. But there is much work to be done here, as together we raise our sights to beyond COVID-19 and move together from crisis and recovery to resilience and reinvention. And as we do that, here at UBC, after a year-long development process, we're just about to launch our new global engagement strategy that recognizes that we stand in service to ideas, people, and the planet as we engage the challenging issues facing our time. And as an institution that stands in service, UBC seeks to act on the basis of humility, not hubris, compassion, not competition, and engagement, not estrangement, where no voice is left behind, where listening is fundamental to each collaboration, where research is also responsive to needs faced and identified by communities, and authentic partnerships are formed with organizations and institutions at all levels, colleges, corporations, communities, cities, and countries, so that we together can achieve greater impact and help shape a more just, sustainable, and prosperous world. I look forward to sharing this service vision with you, Mr. Minister Champagne, and to collaborating with you as we seek to serve this turbulent world. But for now, I'm delighted on behalf of a grateful university to you for giving us this gift of time to share your views on this crisis and to looking ahead. Today's conversation will be moderated by Boyd Hayes, who is completing his first year of the UBC Master of Public Policy and Global Affairs program. And through his work as a Sustainable Agriculture Extension Agent for the US Peace Corps in Senegal and in civil society advocacy and refugee resettlement, Boyd developed a passion for gender equality and economic development in the African context that he carries with him into his SPPGA studies. So for now, welcome, Boyd.
Dr. Chandrasekaran, thank you so much for your introduction. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Please let me extend another welcome to everyone today, including the Minister. I'm so glad that we're able to do this despite not being able to meet in person. As the Vice Provost said, my name is Boyd Hayes and I'm finishing my first year in the SPPGA program here at UBC. I'm very excited to introduce our guest and to get started today, but first let me make a quick announcement. Please note this webinar and the following Q&A are being recorded. By joining the Zoom presentation, we are not asking you to use your video or microphone to participate in the Q&A. Written questions can be submitted, and we ask that you do submit them in the Q&A function. You'll find at the bottom of your Zoom window, not the chat function, but the Q&A function. Once you've submitted your questions, you and others in the audience can upvote questions, and as those rise to the top, in the second half of our meeting today, I'll answer those questions to the Minister. I won't use full names. If your name is attached, I'll use your first name, and if you'd like to submit anonymously, you can do that as well. This recording will be put on the SPPGA website afterwards at sppga.ubc.ca, and the recording won't include the names of attendees, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So without further ado, I would love to introduce the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Foreign Affairs Canada. The Minister was first elected to Parliament in 2015 from the Saint-Maurice-Champlain riding. Before taking his current position, the Minister served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance, then as Minister of International Trade, and subsequently as Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. And then before entering politics, Minister had amassed more than 20 years of experience working at the top of large international companies throughout Europe, specifically in the fields of energy, engineering, and innovation. He holds an LLB and an LLM in American law from the Université de Montréal and Case Western Reserve University, respectively. And he also studied public and private international law at the Hague Academy of International Law in the Netherlands. In 2009, Minister Champagne was named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. He's also served on several boards over the years and was notably president of the Canadian-Swiss Chamber of Commerce and the Banff Forum. Minister, we know your time is valuable and we're very grateful and honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real delight to be with all of you at UBC and particularly the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. I want to thank the Vice Provost. I want to thank you, Boyd, for having me. Honestly, I wish I could be with you more physically, but I think this is a virtual meeting, which is good. That allows us to do more, reduce our carbon footprint, and then we can address the real issues that you want with all your colleagues. So delighted that you invited me and delighted that we start our tour in UBC, because I'll be doing that across Canada. And we selected UBC as the first of the series of talk we're going to be doing. So Boyd, you're the first one to ask me the question. So it's up to you now, you know. You get the first question.
I appreciate being the guinea pig in this sense. So if you don't mind, I guess I will kick it off with the first question, which is fairly broad. Just what has the past month looked like for you? Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about who you've been meeting with, what your day-to-day responsibilities have been, and whether it's been dramatically different than your work, you know, say at the beginning of the year or the end of last year.
Well, first of all, let me say also thank you to the Vice Provost for the kind introduction. Listen, it's very simple. As the world went in pause, my life went in fast forward. You know, this is we're living to unprecedented time. There's never been anything like that. To give you a sense of perspective, you know, when I was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs by Prime Minister Trudeau, the first crisis we had to deal with, you may recall, was the downing of the civilian aircraft by the Iranian regime. Then we had another national crisis when it came to demonstration across Canada with respect to our railroads. And then we went into the COVID crisis. But when it comes to my work, I must say, really, it's a fast forward because to give you a sense of perspective, when we saw the COVID happen, whether it's in Wuhan and then it went to the Diamond Princess in Japan, but what we've been doing is the largest repatriation effort in peacetime in our country's history. I mean, literally, we had tens of thousands of people who were stranded across the world. I'm pleased to say that as we speak today, we have repatriated about 20,000 people on more than 170 flights from about 75 countries. And when we started that, we were monitoring something close to 115 ships with 5,000 to 6,000 Canadians on board. And I'm happy to report to you, Boyd, you're probably the first one to know now that our last Canadian passengers on ship were coming back to Canada yesterday. So basically now we only have crews, still a few dozen people on ships, which are essential crews. But this has been really, we've been facing everything at the same time. Airspace closure, border closure, restriction on the movement of people, martial law in some countries. I often say to Canadians, getting the plane is the easiest part of it, is to get the people to the plane, which becomes very complex. When we were operating in Wuhan at the beginning, to just give you a sense and some of the behind the scene type of thing, we had to manage to get people to about 20 checkpoints before they could get to the airport. So you can imagine how much coordination, how much consultation, cooperation we needed to do. Same thing in Peru. But I must say now we also have a number of Canadians which are trying to come back from India. So our work is not completed. We've been very upfront to Canadians from day one that despite our best efforts, it's likely that there'll still be Canadians who we cannot repatriate, and that we will have to find a way to assist wherever they might be. But I must say it's been, I want to thank all the consular officials around the world. This is unprecedented in terms of volumes and complexity. But when I look back, I think that I'm happy we could bring so many Canadians back home.
No, it's an extraordinary feat, to be honest. Something it was hard to imagine in early February, I'm sure.
No one was really prepared for that, to be honest. I speak to the United Kingdom. I've spoken to my US counterparts. The sheer volume of what we're talking about and the speed at which airspace were closing, border were closing, airports were closing was unprecedented. And sometimes I say that I'm very lucky because at least I was 4-month foreign minister, so I could collect the phone number, the cell phone number of most of my colleagues. And for the first time, I think in our nation history, we did, SMS diplomacy, where I negotiated landing rights with my Peruvian counterpart over SMS. I negotiated airspace access with my Moroccan counterpart, and I still text my Indian counterpart when it comes to issues. So it's a new type of diplomacy. It's fast, it's efficient, and I would say it's really to the point. That's what people expect from us, and hopefully they feel that we have delivered.
Surely. I mean, so this is an action taken in crisis time, but do you imagine that kind of fast-paced diplomacy continuing into the future?
Well, I think when I look at the post-COVID world, when you're faced with something like that, it's the rule of 80-20. We have to deal with the emergency at hand because that's what Canadians expect from us. This is a health emergency, and we need to make sure it does not transform itself into an economic crisis and even less so into a food crisis. So there's a lot of issues that we need to deal with now. But at the same time, we need to look at the post-COVID world. How can we rebuild better and greener? And where can Canada play a meaningful role? And I'm very encouraged by the fact that Canada has been able to convene at the beginning of the crisis. Believe it or not, I look at my Rolodex. Well, it doesn't exist anymore, but I guess I look at my phone and I went into my contacts and I did contact a number of foreign ministers, about 15 of them. And it became kind of the foreign minister COVID coordination group where we meet basically every week. We have convened countries that don't typically get to talk to every week. I can think of Brazil, Singapore, South Korea, Turkey, obviously France, Germany, the UK, India. So it's been quite extraordinary to see that we could bring people from about every continent, Australia, trying to contribute. First was about how can we help repatriate our citizens. Then it was about air bridges, a bit like you found in the Second World War, understanding we needed to maintain connectivity, maritime routes. We talk also about supply chain. So I think the post-COVID world, things are going to change. I think you'll find new alliances. I think people will focus far more on strategic supply chain, food security, economic security would be at the forefront. And I really think that Canada, and particularly the students who are looking at the role of Canada in the world, I think that we are in a very good place. We've been a trusted, open, reliable partner during this crisis. I hear that time and time again. And I think this is where Canada wants to be and where Canada can make a difference.
Absolutely. I read about a week ago today, I think, a declaration was made under that ministerial coordination group regarding a lot of elements of reopening the economy, the global economy, providing aid for under-resourced countries who are struggling, like in Africa or small island nations. It was fascinating to see the signatories to that group. And as well, earlier in the month, I think there was another declaration released under the Alliance for Multilateralism or something like that in the title. I just wondered, so were these efforts both spearheaded by you? Was this a quick opportunity for Canada to leap into, I suppose, what they're calling mini-lateralism, considering both of these groups kind of notably lacked signatories from the US or China? It's an interesting group, each one, I think.
Well, it's kind of, you put people who want together. You know, when we did this COVID ministerial group, to be honest, Boyd, you'd be surprised. I really look at my contact on my iPhone. This is really how it started. And it happened to be kind of a subgroup of the G20 because we have people from, like I said, I mentioned a number of countries. And it's kind of the weekly meeting that, you know, it's like what we do today. Those who can come and we just share and we exchange best practice, lessons learned. And we add that declaration, which is quite astonishing. If you look at the size of the country, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, I mean, big countries say, listen, and Canada brought these people together. With respect to the Alliance of Multilateralism, this is really about liberal democracies. This is an initiative that the French and the German had started. Canada was very much at the forefront. My predecessor was there at the time. And it's quite, it's really the liberal democracies who say, let's stick together to strengthen the multilateral institution. Let's remember that our domestic response to COVID has been informed in many ways by international institutions. If you look on the health side, a lot of the science and data came from the World Health Organization. If you look at the economic recovery, you had the G7 finance minister, the G20 finance minister, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. If you look at data for the recovery, you look at the OECD. So a lot of, you know, although everyone has been focused on the domestic response, I think there's never been a better time to consult, to cooperate, and to coordinate our response. Because for the first time in our generation, you know, in the last 75 years, we never had anything which was global in terms of crisis, which touched developed country, developing countries, me in Shawinigan, potentially you in British Columbia, to the people in Shanghai. And would we touch even a British Prime Minister to a health worker in Windsor? So it's astonishing that for the first time, I think there's a sense that the real challenges of our generation, of our time, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about this pandemic, are global challenges. With respect to the pandemic, it's a common enemy, it's invisible, it knows no border, no age, no income differentiation. Everyone is potentially at risk. So the fact of working together for me makes more sense than ever. And that's why we came together as liberal democracies and said, let's strengthen. Yes, there'll be a time where we need to do a postmortem and say whether the mission, the leadership, the alert system, the financing of it could be reviewed. But for the time being, I think what we need to do is strengthen the international institution, because that's the best we have now to deal with the crisis.
I am genuinely exuberant to hear that, because I think one of the big fears with such an invisible enemy that's passing border to border and really kind of stopping our global economy is that some countries may revert to protectionism, isolationism in the fallout of this. So I think it's really exciting to see Canada spearheading in the opposite direction to maintain coordination and cooperation between countries and these multilateral organizations. I suppose another thought I've been having, I have a lot of focus in Africa and Southern Africa. Certainly countries there, South Africa's been doing a wonderful job in handling this COVID crisis, but countries in Africa, generally, their resources available to them are limited, and their public health response is going to be limited. And I wonder if you see Canada's aid in those scenarios happening more bilaterally or multilaterally through these alliances.
Both, and I would say, let me share with you, Boyd, I was really, really proud that the last country to sign on our common declaration was South Africa. Mm-hmm. South Africa is with us, which gave me great comfort. We had the countries in the north like Morocco, but I'm happy that we had also sub-Saharan countries like South Africa coming, which really shows how global the response needs to be. To your point, I think it's a bit of both. I was privileged enough to be able to go in Africa, I think, almost 4 times in my 4 months before all these crises came. And so whether it was when we went in Ethiopia, whether when I was in Morocco, when I was in Senegal, at the time, we were able to forge these relationships. I think we have established a relationship of respect, of trust, of listening. One of the roles that Canada can play, and really, I would really send an appeal to each and every one of you who are listening, send me your thoughts. We're writing a book and a manual that had yet to be written. Basically, every day we're writing a page of history, because the way we're going to shape the future and the way we respond today to the crisis is going to inform future generation. And so when I look at Africa, one of the things I've been trying to do, Boyd, is really to try to give a voice to those who cannot make their voice heard. Canada is very privileged to be at the center of the G7, the G20, now this foreign minister COVID, whether it's NATO. We are in many, many fora where we can make a difference. And one of the things we have done consistently was to talk about the most vulnerable. And whether it's the Pacific Island, whether it's in Africa, whether it's the CARICOM in the Caribbean, in South America. And I'll give you a very concrete example. I was talking with Fiji, and Fiji was saying, think about how difficult it is economically for us now. But imagine if you're a nation, an island nation, which most of your income comes from tourism. So you get your hard currency, like the US dollar, to tourism. But now you're facing a health crisis, which you need currency, obviously, to buy these critical supply and to buy energy to be able to move these products to your country. And that's what you're lacking now, because obviously you don't get the income to tourism. So we've been talking to the Caribbean, we've been talking to Pacific Island nation, we've been talking to colleagues in Africa. And that's why I think that Canada can become this very strategic partner for nations. Talk about food diplomacy. What are we doing with excess food in Canada? Can we not become the trusted partner of the world? Look, for example, about health diplomacy. What are we going to do with excess stock? Can we not become a provider for these nations in need? When I look at supply chain, Canada was one of the countries who kept its supply chain open, because we understood that, with COVID, you have to understand that as long as there's going to be COVID somewhere, we're going to be at risk everywhere. And we understood that from the beginning and tried to shape the international narrative around making sure that we just don't focus inward, because in order to protect your own population, you have to do both. You have to look inward and outward in order to do that. And I'm pretty proud of the discussion, the engagement that we've been able to do with Africa. With the 54 country, we talked to the African Union, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. We co-chair with Jamaica. Imagine, where have you seen Canada and Jamaica being co-chair? I was so proud to co-chair with my colleague. And believe it or not, I'll give you a behind the scene, because those are the good story. You'll find them in my book one day, but you'll know at least a couple of them in advance. So they asked me, Minister, would you co-chair an event of the UN on Zoom? So I'll be honest with you, I did not even know what Zoom was. So I said, how do you want me to do that? Well, you say, you're going to be in front of your computer, and at that time, we thought 75 people would log in, just like as we are now. But actually 314 people logged in. So we basically had one of the biggest, in according to our ambassador, of a UN meeting, a virtual one, about the SDGs, to go back to the Vice Provost, the Sustainable Development Goal, and how we can help finance them. And you know what, Boyd? It worked. Everyone got a chance to speak. We had no hiccup. We could do more by staying where we are, reducing carbon footprint, engaging in real issues, and people were more disciplined than I've ever seen before.
No, it's unbelievable. I love to hear it, to be honest. I really do. Well, Minister, I have more of my own questions, but I think we're supposed to move into the Q&A section from the audience, if you're ready to do that.
You're the boss.
Okay, happily. I think, sadly, I skipped someone here and answered one of their questions, or asked one of their questions already on my own. So the first question we have here is from Julian. Julian says, what we're hearing relatively little about in the news is the differential impact of the COVID pandemic on the Global South. What roles are the counterparts in the Global South playing in debates about global and multilateral responses, including the planning of the post-COVID world that you just mentioned? Are these responses structured regionally? That is a different view in parts of Asia than parts of sub-Saharan Africa, for example. I think you touched on this, surely, especially in regard to Africa, but I suppose the heart of the question is there going to be a dramatically different response from region to region?
Well, what we've been trying to say, Julian, on that is to bring people together. If you look at, for example, the Foreign Minister COVID response group, you have countries like Brazil, we have countries like Peru. If you look at, in South America, we had country like Indonesia, which is very welcome, because obviously this really matters. We had countries like Australia, South Africa, India. So we're trying to bring people who can bring a perspective, Morocco, different perspective. That's why I say this COVID crisis is bringing some old alliances, but also some new alliances. And what I think is really important, and I think, Boyd, you said it because of your passion of the work you've done in Africa. One of the things which keeps me very attuned to what's going on is to give voice to those who are, their voice is not necessarily, they don't have access necessarily to the same international fora we can. And if I look at, for example, the Caribbean, I made sure that I could talk to countries to make sure that their voice is heard, and that Canada could replicate or amplify their voice to say, listen, let's make sure that when we do our actions, we don't forget those, for example, who are dependent on one particular economy, like tourism, which are, it's kind of a double whammy now. They have a health crisis, but a very strong economic crisis. And making sure that these voices are heard. And to your point, clearly, I think we will see probably a peak in some COVID cases in other parts of the world when it comes in May and June, because data is coming perhaps a bit slowly. But I'm sure that when these countries start testing in larger numbers, we will see that we need, as the international community, to step in and to step up our response so that we can work together in respect, in collaboration, and listening to the needs, because the needs vary from country to country.
Sure. Thank you for your answer. I think our next question is from Benoit. I have a rather simple question, one that is probably at the back of every Canadian's mind nowadays. With the ongoing situation in the USA being the new hotspot for the pandemic, with the president pushing for a rapid reopening of the economy, how have you managed relationships with our southern neighbor throughout the crisis so far? And has it been particularly difficult? Does there seem to be a trade-off between maintaining the health of Canadians and not damaging the trade relationship?
Well, that's a very good question, Benoit. From the get-go, we said that obviously the United States is our largest trading partner. We're talking about $2 billion of trade in goods and services per day. So that's why when we closed the border, we did that by mutual agreement. We did it for the health and safety of Canadians and people on both sides of the border. And it's the same thing when it comes to supply chain. I remember having a discussion with my counterpart in the United States. And as you know, as Canadians, we're kind of used to that. I had to remind him a way that, you know, in 2019, Canada exported for billions of dollars of medical equipment, that we have about 1,000 people that go from Windsor to Detroit every day to support the health infrastructure there. That we have people in Quebec, where I'm calling you from, which are going to help in the state of New York. So the point was really about, and we know this as Canadian, you know, this is Team Canada talking now. We know that sometimes we have to remind our American friends and telling them that we're partners and allies, and that these supply chain are very much integrated, that what you're trying to produce in GM in Detroit is you know, to do the ventilators and what you're trying to achieve there, you have parts coming from Canada. So these supply chain, maintaining them intact, are actually providing a benefit on both sides of the border. And it's kind of something, as you know, that we need to do from time to time. You're in BC, so I'm sure when you talk to colleagues in Washington State, we always have to remind our American friends that working together is in the best interest of people on both sides of our border.
Surely, surely. Worth remembering, I think, on the south side of the border. The next question we have is from Alexander. Alex says, what do you believe are the long-term impacts of COVID-19 on the global supply chain and our future trading agreements with international partners?
Very good question. I think there's never been a better time for Canada to shine. What I think is that Canada distinguished itself during this crisis as being, like I say, a trustworthy ally, a reliable supplier, and a predictable vendor. And these things are going to matter. You know, Canada, when I was trade minister, I'm so proud to say that now we have a free trade agreement with Europe. We have won the CPTPP with Asia. We have one, obviously, with the United States. We have access to the largest market in the world. Now, one thing that we can do as a country is to say, okay, if we want to rebuild better and greener, what can be the role of Canada when countries are going to be looking at more sustainable, more stable and predictable supply chain, whether it's on the side of food, whether it's the side of medical equipment, whether it's on, and there'll be another crisis, hopefully not too soon, but you know, if the past is any guidance of the future, there'll be something else. So I think that Canada has a unique opportunity to be that convener of choice, to be that supplier of choice, to be that trusted partner. And I think supply chain will play quite of an important role in foreign policy going forward, because number of countries have seen that not having domestic production has created a number of challenges. People have been struggling to get critical medical supplies and PPE. And so I think there'll be a rethink of that. And I hope, and I will certainly work to that effect, to position Canada as a leader in building better, greener, and smarter.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, next question is from Gavin. Gavin says a significant topic nowadays is the decoupling from China, especially in regard for essential medical supplies and other products that may be essential for national security. Can you share your thoughts on this?
Well, one of the things we did from the beginning, and this is behind the scene again, that's for the book, but I'm giving you another chapter, is that when all this happened, this was all hands on deck, whether it's Minister Freeland, whether it was Minister Anand, myself, the Prime Minister, everyone, Minister Sajan, who's our defense minister, we said, how can we all help to get into our own network to make sure that we have proper supply for Canadians, both in terms of volumes, but also quality. So one of the things we did, we created a crisis center in our embassy in Beijing to make sure that we can help with the logistics. So vetting the suppliers, making sure the logistics would work from the manufacturing plant up to the airport, making sure that these could be loaded, and coordinating all these cargo planes that were coming, because the federal government is buying, provinces are buying, some municipalities, some communities. So trying to play a role. That was step one. And I spoke also to my Chinese counterpart to make sure that obviously I would raise the case of Michael Covering and Spafford, because they've been in arbitrary detention now for 501 days. And I said, That's 501 days too many. Also, to make sure that we would talk to our Chinese counterpart about the need to share information, to be transparent in times of crises like that, especially on the health side, and making sure as well that Canada would have access both in quantity and quality to supplies. That was step one. Step two was also to diversify. You know, when I was trade minister, I always say we had the imperative of diversification. It's good to have, you know, the market, 80% of our export, less so in BC. I think we're down close to 50%, but in other provinces is way above that, is to diversify. So we did make calls to manufacturing entity in Europe, in Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy, to diversify. And the third one is domestic production, to make sure that we could become self-sufficient. So it's kind of a three-prong approach where you say, secure what you need in terms of volume and quality from China, diversify in other markets like in Europe, and make sure you build the domestic capacity so that we can help our small and medium-sized companies and innovation here in our country.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on that note, I remember a fun time a few months ago when the US-China trade war felt like one of the biggest looming shadows in the global economy. Do you feel that that this pandemic minimizes that, exacerbates it? I mean, how do you feel that the pandemic is going to affect that in the long run?
Well, it's certainly going to have an impact because you've seen that there's been a lot of concern and accusations going back and forth. There's issue about disinformation. There's issue about domestic response and transparency and accuracy. So I think when there's going to be a postmortem about what we've been all facing, there's going to be tough questions asked. And there's going to be, like I said, question about did we have the right institutions in order to deal with the alert system on the health side and how we respond to future pandemic. And I think we, you know, Australia has been calling for an independent investigation. We certainly believe that now it's the time to support the World Health Organization because that's what we have, and that's the best international institution we have with respect to science and best practices, which is helping a number of countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands. So, but at some stage, there will need to be a postmortem. You know, sometimes I say it's not when you have a fire raging that you need to ask yourself whether you have the right smoke detector. And now we need to make sure that we deal with the emergency at hand. And when this is done, let's ask the tough questions that need to be asked. And from there, I think you will see some reflection about the international system we have in place to help us to deal with future crises.
Absolutely. Well, I think in relation to that, we've got a question from Poonam. It says, Canada is active in sending skilled Canadian volunteers abroad to support development initiatives. How is funding for projects and organizations supporting international development initiatives such as Youth Challenge International, SUCO, or the UN Association of Canada changed in result of COVID-19 and associated budgetary changes, especially with tightening belts over the coming years? How can we expect Canada's engagement in supporting youth livelihoods abroad to change in the aftermath of COVID-19?
Well, certainly we're looking at all different ways that we can support international development. You know, Minister Gould, my colleague, has been very active on the international scene to not only convene, but also to be able to act in very concrete ways to support a number of African nations. When it comes to the domestic help that we're providing to students, you probably heard the Canada Emergency Student benefit, which is going to provide a benefit of $1,250 for the month of May to August, so 4 months. And those who help someone with disability will go up to $1,750. We're talking also about the Canada Emergency Student Grant, which is going to give $5,000 to those who are going to help with the effort, because we know that youth is going to be a big differentiator as how we tackle that crisis this year and this summer in particular. We're looking at creating about 75,000 jobs for youth over the summer. So that's on the domestic side. On the international side, there's no doubt that we're going to be looking at ways where we can support. We're doing that in a number of different ways, whether it's with Red Cross in some country, the Red Crescent in some other country, international organization, those who can have a meaningful impact immediately. Because I think what we need now is probably less talk and more action. This is a crisis. We have institutions that can help. We have volunteers who are ready to go. Now is the time, and I'm happy to talk to you because I know, as the Vice Provost said, UBC has a great history when it comes to sustainable development goals, to being engaged around the world. And I'd be happy to hear about whatever projects you may have, and so that we can see how we can support you in making a difference, not only here at home, but abroad.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to be a part of that, whatever it is. I myself was set to do an internship through the IDDIP program with the UN Association of Canada this summer. So obviously that's not going to happen, but I'm excited to be.
You should be the one talking then, you know?
No, hardly. So we have a good question here from an anonymous attendee. They say, "Hi, Minister. Thank you for talking to us all today. Can you talk about your journey to becoming appointed minister, some of your day-to-day challenges, and what makes your job in public policy so rewarding? Thank you."
Well, you know, I did one thing that you did, Boyd. I knew that I had to leave to come back with better equipped, you know. I have someone in my team who always say, different is better than better. So I knew that if I wanted to make at least a difference in my own way, I lived 20 years of my life abroad. So I went to gain experience. I understood that the world would be more connected. I'm 50 now, so I did that. My first job was in Italy at 24. I didn't speak a word of Italian. Then it led me to live in Switzerland for 10 years, and then the UK. And then being involved in different things, whether it's the BAM Forum in Canada, which I think some of you should look at, or the Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum, to try to broaden my horizons, to try to learn new things, to experience new things. I understood that this was needed if I wanted to be a better leader and come back. I always knew I wanted to come back and serve. I was not necessarily aware when you go abroad, it's not obvious how you're going to come back home. But it worked for me. And then I came back and got elected, and Prime Minister asked me to play a role in cabinet. I think in my day-to-day job, you know, I read a book once, which was True North from Bill George at Harvard. And I would recommend that to anyone. I've given probably, and I have no royalty on this book, by the way, but I've given the book many times because it's your leadership journey in life. And sometimes you'll feel like an imposter. Sometimes you feel what kind of skill you need. Are you good enough? But I would say the best advice I would say, I've always taken the road less traveled. Never doubt in yourself, because when you look back, you're as good as anyone else to take that leadership challenge. And I'm thinking particularly also young women who might be listening and say, just take that challenge and then open up yourself to the world. You know, it's not because you went at UBC and you got a master. Learning is a life journey, particularly at the speed of change. You cannot get the master and think this is it. For example, in this crisis, Boyd, we're writing the manual every day. Who would have said, if I was with you and 4 months ago, I would have told you that I would be texting a Moroccan foreign minister in order to get access for planes to land, or that I would phone or text my Indian counterpart in order to unlock the access so we can repatriate people. Who would have said that Canada could convene countries like Brazil and Turkey on a call? Many things have happened that I would say it's out of necessity. It's out of a willingness to make a difference and trusting yourself. You know, we knew from the beginning that not everything we would be doing would be perfect. And we had to accept that. It's like, you know, when I was presented with this challenge, when people said there might be like 3 million Canadians abroad, there might be 400,000 Canadians registered with us. And I had to say, well, listen, we'll do our very best. It's never been done before. So, I look at today and we could repatriate more than 20,000 people, like I told you, from 75 countries on 70 flights. We went ahead. Did we do mistake along the way? Definitely. But did we get the big picture? Did we get it right most of the time? I would say so. And that's what gives me strength every day to say, when you have a big challenge like that, you just have to jump in. People expect you to be fast but thoughtful. So you have to put your feet, one on the strategic aspect and one on the very proactive aspect of it. And keep the balance and stay true to your principle, to your value. And when you do that, in a world which is looking for people like you, grounded in values, grounded in reality, grounded in principles, I think that when you leave UBC with the chance to get an education there across Canada, you are far better equipped than I would say so many people to make a difference. I would say my message would be, go make a difference. Learn from us, learn from the mistakes we might have made during this crisis, but above all, go make a difference. And you will do it your own way, and I'm sure you'll make everyone proud.
I really hope so. I really, really hope so. I think I have my eye on what role I can play in any, obviously, very small way in recovery. And I think a lot of my colleagues as well. In fact, I have a question here from Nicholas that I think, with so many of us in the audience, and myself included, aspiring to be decision makers, policy makers in the future, I think is important. And he says, how do you balance your personal and professional life, especially during a crisis? Many of us look forward to public service and leadership roles. However, these roles can often take all of your time and energy. How do you carve out time for yourself and your family? I mean, can you?
Well, I wish I would do better.
Sure.
I wish I would do better. To be honest, in times of crises like that, it's been extremely difficult because we have been facing unprecedented challenge. Sometimes I feel that whether I wake up earlier and go to bed later, I never get a chance to do everything that I want to do. So at some stage, you have to protect the asset. That's another thing that I've learned in this journey, is that you need to protect your health, both physically and mentally. You need to go to bed with the conviction that you've done everything you can to help people. I can assure you, I went to times where the light was not clear at the end of the tunnel. And at some stage, imagine, we're receiving close to 15,000 emails a day and probably 10,000 calls. And I would get with my team about 600 messages a day of people who were desperate to come back home. So if you ask me, in all honesty, does that get to you? Definitely. We're all human. We're all trying to do our best with the means, with the conditions that we were given, with the challenges that we were provided. That's why I learned that there was a difference between what I want to do and what I can do. A lot of the challenges and the barriers that were imposed on us were by foreign government. So at some stage, you need to take a step back. Did I get that perfectly right? No. If you ask my family, they would probably say I was not very present during these times. But at some stage, I felt compelled. And maybe I took it very personally, but I really went in it with all the team, the thousands and thousands of people. They put their hearts and mind and skills to help others, like frontline workers. I knew we were the first wave of the tsunami because I knew that the first one would need our assistance as a government would be Canadians abroad. And that's why we went out with the Prime Minister, with all of us, with our hearts and mind, knowing that we'll do mistakes along the way, but knowing that what matters most is that we get it right most of the time. And I think in True North you may find better tricks. I should go back and read it. Maybe I need to take some of the trick that was written in the book that I read at the time to just find the right balance, because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're at the beginning of probably what will be a long crisis, and you need to keep the strength in order to be able to help others.
Absolutely. So I think we've got time for about one more question. I'm trying to decide based on a few of these top ones. Here, you've got one from Eve. It says, Minister, the IMF has just said that we are now facing the greatest global crisis since the 1930s. What made the 1930s so deadly was the inability of great powers to meet and manage the crisis through cooperation. The G20 summit on March 26 was particularly disappointing. Do you sense that your counterparts, especially among the big powers, understand how high the stakes are today? Is there a true sense that cooperating to save modern civilization has come before talking of Cold War?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly would need more international coordination. I mean, that's why we launched our own little initiative, if you want, to try to bring people together, not only once. You know, I believe in the power of action much more than words. I am not your typical diplomat who will spend a lot of time on declaration, and I am much more, result focused. When we have calls, I try to say, okay, what are we going to do with that? I remember the first one we had, we said we needed to keep transit hub open. Why? Because I knew to repatriate Canadians, they'd have to transit, whether it's in Doha, whether it's in London, in England. We knew that we need to maintain air bridges because that's how cargo and remaining passengers could go on. So there's been some discussion, you know, G20 health minister, G7 health minister, finance minister. But to your point, definitely, I think that this has shown that as much as people have been focusing on the domestic response, it goes back to a point I made earlier, is that the domestic response of most countries has been informed by the multilateral institution. And I think that we work better when we work together. I'll give you a very concrete example, again, behind the scene. As you know, Canada was a bit behind in terms of when the COVID crisis hit very much Canada. So that allowed us to learn, for example, from South Korea, which has managed very well the crisis. So in being humble, being outgoing and say, how can we learn from what happened in South Korea? Mm-hmm. And South Korea has been generous in sharing best practices, lessons learned. And that's one thing that I think you'll find out of this particular crisis. New alliances, whole will remain, but new ones are being formed. Places and people, and never underestimate the power of people, because behind these countries, it's people. If there's one thing that I learned to this crisis is the power of bringing people together, people of goodwill, people who want to do things. And one thing that we do particularly well as Canadians is to bring people together, not with a hidden agenda, but with an open mind, not with trying to impose our idea, but more listening to others, not trying to exclude anyone, but keeping everything we do open to others who may want to join, and always being respectful. So I think that you will see a rethink after this crisis. And certainly, everyone wish that there'd be more coordination, more cooperation, more consolidation in the response. I think Prime Minister Trudeau has been one of the leaders who brought that back at the G20 and the G7. But certainly, the worst thing would be is to wait for others to do something. That's one thing that I've learned also in my leadership journey. If you see a gap, if you see an opportunity, take it. Don't wait for the others. Don't necessarily wait for those that might be traditionally the one who should be leading. You jump in. If there's a vacuum, jump in and bring your thoughts. I mean, honestly, when I started this group, I really took my iPhone and look at the contact, and I'd start really texting a couple of colleagues and say, would you guys like to get on a call this Friday? We could share best practice. We could do a roundtable. And this has become the call. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't wait for some big conference to say, let's get together. No, I just took the phone, sent maybe 10 SMS, and here we go. And then the word got out that say, oh, Canada is having this kind of cool meeting every week that people can share. And now people wanted to join, and then we structured it. So I think that that's the way to go. And I think that's what you learn, hopefully at UBC, and to what you're doing is, you know, assume the leadership. Don't wait for others. Continue to engage as you're doing now, and with different leaders, and certainly take the road less traveled. I think this is probably, as we're looking at the future, no one would have predicted. I mean, we had 75 years where we did not have a crisis, which was really touching everyone in the world. This is the first one, not likely to be the last one. So there's lessons to be learned for you, board, and your colleagues who are studying now in the master. Learn from our mistake, take what we did, which was good, and build the blueprint for doing better next time. And I have full trust in you. And I hope you will invite me again, because now in this virtual world, I feel closer to UBC and to all of you in BC that I could ever do. So until we can get in person, this was a great way of getting together.
Absolutely. I can assure you we will be taking those lessons to heart and interrogating them thoroughly as students and as citizens in the months to come. I really enjoyed this today. I think this was incredible. I'm very grateful for your time. I think this is the end of our session, but I just want to again thank you so much for spending time with us today, and specifically for having me here with you.
Well, thank you, Boyd. You did a great job. You have to be proud, and your colleagues, I'm sure, are proud. This video is going to go viral on Twitter, Facebook, I'm sure. So you did a great job, and thanks to you all. Look forward to talk to you. Stay safe, follow health advice, and we will get out of this crisis together. So with that, I say goodbye to you from Shawinigan in Quebec, to my good friends in BC, and hope to see you very soon.
Merci. Ciao.
Merci.